Hello everyone, Nelson Lee with the Agape Livecast, taking a look at Tropical Storm Beryl in the Gulf of Mexico. We're looking at Advisory 32 here from earlier this morning. However, there has been an update, not a lot of changes in intensity. However, one thing I do want to show you between the earlier advisory this morning and the update, you can see that what has happened here is it's missed the track to the right. If we go back and look at Advisory 32, you can see that it should have been more over to the west, and now with the update, it's sitting more to the right of the track. And what that's going to mean is they're probably going to have to adjust this track a little bit more to the right on the advisory at 4 o'clock, and we'll see how that works out. So taking a look right now at the 1 o'clock Central Daylight Savings Time update, we have it sitting at 23.6 north, 92.7 west. That is about 415 miles southeast of Corpus Christi. Winds are 60 miles an hour, and it's moving to the west-northwest or almost northwest at 12 miles an hour, and it's starting to make that curve towards the northwest, and the barometric pressure is down to 997 millibars. And if we look at what the track from the Hurricane Center shows, has it making that curve towards the northwest and gradually increasing in intensity as it reaches the Texas coast. And we'll look at that in a little bit more detail here in a minute or two. And you can see that gradual curve towards the northwest and north-northwest tomorrow as it reaches the Texas coast. And the big player here is probably going to be the rainfall. You can see we have a swath of 8 to 12 inches out there to the right of the track, and then a large swath of 6 to 8 inches from the west side of Houston to just east of San Antonio. And that's going to be the big player as this thing slows down a little bit and moves towards the north as it recurves. Now, taking a look at the reasonable arrival of tropical storm force winds, we're going to start seeing those tropical storm force winds along the coast tomorrow evening. And you can see there right around the Freeport area, you've got about a 60% chance, 50 to 60% chance of seeing those tropical storm force winds. As you get over towards the Houston area and as you move inland a little bit, you've got a lot less chance of seeing those tropical storm force winds. Still may be enough to cause some power outages in those areas. And a lot of it is going to be track dependent. Again, if they have to shift that track to the right, which I have a feeling they're going to have to do, based on a couple of the things that I'm seeing that we'll talk a little bit more about in detail here in a minute, I believe that we may see this chance of seeing a sustained tropical storm force wind cone shift more to the east. And here again is your peak storm surge forecast. As I mentioned in my last video yesterday that I thought we would see that spread more to the right, and it has. And I wouldn't be surprised to see that 3 to 5 foot eventually spread. Maybe it's later tonight, maybe it's tomorrow, spread over towards east of San Luis Pass over towards High Island. So what we have going on in the satellite imagery, this is the water vapor imagery. It takes a look at how much water vapor is in the atmosphere. It gives us a really good idea of where upper level lows are and how much moisture is available, what's going on in the upper levels. Remember, we had a pretty vigorous upper level low here yesterday, and that has really kind of died out and backed off a little bit. And one of the things that's happening is we don't see as much shear over the storm, and we can kind of see these clouds starting to fan out to the west, and that's adding some ventilation to the system, and that's what tropical cyclones really like. They like a fairly calm atmosphere aloft. They don't like shear. And if you can add some ventilation in all the quadrants, that'll really, it's kind of like crank starting a lawnmower, and it really gets that engine going, that tropical engine. And if we look over at the infrared imagery, we can see that we really do have some sustained convective bursts right over the center, and that is why the pressure has come down a little bit. And I suspect that we're really going to see that cranking up overnight and into the day tomorrow. Taking a look at the visible imagery, it's not as pronounced convectively as it was earlier, but that is because of the time of the day. We call that a diurnal effect, and diurnal meaning twice daily. You see this in the tropics, especially in weaker systems. You'll see them pop up at certain times of the day and then they kind of die off. Uh, this is not unheard of, especially towards the afternoon in a weaker tropical system, for it to kind of lose a little bit of its punch. But as we get into the overnight hours, I suspect that this is really going to pop up again, especially once it starts moving away from the Yucatan Peninsula. As you can see, these streamers of clouds coming off the Yucatan, and you can see we have a little dry slot in here. It's still pulling in some dry air from the Yucatan Peninsula. And if we look at this special satellite here called the Mimic, we can see this satellite is showing us what's called precipitable moisture, and it is the available moisture in the atmosphere of the column. And you can see what's happening with Beryl is it's got this dry slot that is being pulled in here from the Yucatan Peninsula, and it's being sucked into the core of the system. And what that basically is bad gas to the engine. And engines don't like bad gas. Tropical systems like very high octane fuel. And even though right now the water temperatures that is over are very good for development, this dry air that's being pulled in off of the Yucatan is not good for development. So they're kind of counterbalancing each other. This is what we call, right in here is what we call a convergent asymptote. It's where the winds are coming together and being brought together. And normally in a tropical system, that is where a lot of explosive development and a lot of moisture is being brought in together to fuel the storm. However, what's happening here is because that is occurring over land, it's really sapping the storm dry a little bit and really kind of hindering the storm. That should move off the Yucatan Peninsula later tonight, probably between 10 and midnight. And when that does, I suspect that this system is really going to start to get its act together, because everything that is being brought into the storm at that time will be coming from the Gulf of Mexico, which is very, very, very warm. And I want to show you Air Force reconnaissance real quickly. Reconnaissance, as you can see, has found a storm that's been moving mostly to the northwest rather than the west-northwest over the last few hours. And as you can see, this track is to the right of what the model cluster has been. And I suspect that it's going to continue to kind of move along this direction. Now, what that means is that rather than a landfall around the Rockport, Corpus Christi area, we're probably going to see that track nudged a little bit to the right, perhaps again, maybe more towards the Port O'Connor area, Matagorda, northern Matagorda Island area, and possibly eventually finding landfall somewhere between Port O'Connor and Matagorda, but definitely between Rockport and Matagorda. Somewhere in this area is probably where our final landfall will end up. Now, as it tracks over this area, it's going to have really good fuel to work with. It's going to pass over an area of really high heat content. There's a nice bubble of high heat content that it's about to pass over, and that's going to be the way it is all the way to the coast. And if we look at the potential for rapid intensity, we have a nice potential sitting off the southeast coast of Texas. And so that's something we probably need to be concerned with. So as we look at the steering, what's going on with the steering is that this trough of low pressure that we've been talking about for almost a week now is there. The weakness is there, and we have this trough dipping down in the jet stream over the central United States. It's finally coming down. and it is opening up a weakness for Beryl to slide into the north. And the ridge of high pressure is still there in the southeast, but this trough of low pressure in the central United States is opening up this weakness and allowing Beryl to slide in towards the north. And this is the GFS, this is the 12Z GFS, and I've been waiting for the European to show up, but that's the reason this is a little bit late, and it just hasn't yet. And so if we look at the GFS, what every model seems to be showing is an intensifying storm as it approaches the Texas coast. And again, I think this is a little bit too far to the southwest. We're probably looking at a system that's going to make landfall just a little bit to the right of this. And one of the things too that we see is that this system is going to have great upper level outflow all the way to the coast. And what we also see is that it's going to have good access to the jet stream up here. It's going to be tapping into a jet max, a divergent quadrant of the jet max, which is going to allow it to ventilate the system. And it's a good thing that this thing is not going to be out over open waters more than it is. But the potential is there for it to rapidly strengthen into a high-end Cat 1, maybe even a Cat 2, as it approaches the Texas coast. So with that being said, I want to talk about having an emergency management plan. So the first thing you need to do is begin your preparations now. You need to know your evacuation zone. You need to know where you live. If you live along the central or upper Texas coast, know your evacuation zone. Now, if you decide to evacuate, don't wait till the last second. You need to have an evacuation plan, and you don't need to get caught in floodwaters. And that is freshwater flooding or saltwater flooding. Don't do it. That's very dangerous. Make sure right now, today's the day to start making these plans. Make sure your car's gas has at least a half a tank in case you have to get out of somewhere quickly. You don't want to be trying to go somewhere and then find a gas station. Go ahead and make sure that you have a half a tank at least, but go ahead and try to fill it up if you can. Another thing, if you've been instructed to evacuate, go ahead and do that, please. I haven't heard of any evacuations, but we're down to 36 hours right now, and we're starting to get on the narrow end of the possible evacuations here. Again, driving through floodwaters and roadways are dangerous. Don't do it. So many people die in hurricanes from freshwater flooding, and that's a leading cause of death. So, one thing also, and I've had several questions from this about this. People wanting to evacuate or feeling like they need to leave. We do not recommend that you evacuate unless you are in an evacuation zone and you've been told to evacuate, unless you meet one of these criteria. If you live with someone who needs electricity to survive, in other words, they're on supplemental oxygen or some other medical equipment that if you lose electricity, their life is in danger or their life is going to be very miserable if they do not have electricity, then you need to evacuate, even if you're not in an evacuation zone. So if you live in a place that floods easily from freshwater flooding, you need to evacuate. If you are in a home that is surrounded by tall trees that could be brought down by high winds, you need to evacuate. Other than that, what we recommend is post-storm evacuation. After the storm passes, if you have lost electricity and you may be out for a while, evacuate at that time. Figure out where you're going post-storm. Go ahead and make that plan, but don't evacuate prior to, because especially in a dangerous storm, not necessarily this storm, but many of you remember the evacuation for Hurricane Rita. One of the reasons why that happened was so many people evacuated that they didn't need to evacuate. They weren't in an evacuation zone. There were people evacuating from the woodlands, and they didn't need to evacuate. And they had 2 or 3 cars on the road, and that was ridiculous. And that was the reason why people were on the road for a day or two. So one thing you can do right now is charge your cell phones and have a battery backup. We have multiple battery backups for our cell phones. They're so cheap now. We were buying them back in the day when they were $50 or $100 a piece, and now they're 15 or 20 or even cheaper. You can buy a battery backup for your cell phone. It'll give you 2 or 3 charges. So go ahead and do that, and have other batteries on hand. Have plenty of food and water for you and your pets, and also have some cash on hand. Finally, in the southeast Texas area, these are the evacuation zones. The kind of purple looking, mauve looking color, that's the coastal zone. Those are going to be the first zones to have ordered evacuation. If there's going to be an evacuation from this storm, I imagine it's going to be the coastal zones. And they'll order it by zip code. Then we're going to have Zone A, and then Zone B, and then Zone C. So if you live in Zone A, you need to be really starting to prepare. I don't expect a Zone A or B evacuation from this system. I really don't. It's certainly not a Zone C. And the reason being is because this system, it's going to rapidly intensify. They would not have the time to evacuate a Zone B or a Zone C. Everybody would get stuck on the highway. However, I would anticipate possibly some Zone A some zone coastal zone evacuations, especially for the southwestern part of the area down in Matagorda. That is a possibility. So if you're watching from that area, that's a possibility. So I want to close with the scripture, and it's what Jesus said in John 16:33. He said, I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world. You know, we are never promised that everything's going to be easy. We will have tribulation. We're going to have tribulation of all sorts and kinds. We're going to have persecutions, but we're also just going to have hurricanes and storms and tribulations, natural disasters. But in Jesus Christ, we can always have peace and have security and have a peace of mind that transcends all understanding. So until next time, I hope that God blesses you, and just take comfort in knowing that He is there. And also make sure that you are paying attention to what the local officials in your area are saying. They've been doing this professionally. I've worked with so many of them over the course of my career, and they do know what they're doing, and they really do care about your safety first and foremost. So may God bless you.